What's up, everyone? Vinny Camo here with a new episode of Behind the Pulse. I'm super excited today because we're going to be talking a lot about events and festival production, something I'm super happy and passionate about. I'm really excited to talk with today Sky Stahl. Sky, what's up? How you doing?
How's it going, Vinny? Thanks for having me on the show.
Dude, I'm excited to talk because I feel like we've had careers that are kind of similar in ways because I've done a lot of festival production work and I know you have. So I'm really excited to kind of break it down and talk to you about things you've learned and also kind of the hectic state of where we are now in festivals and events. So I appreciate you taking some time and I look forward to kind of digging into some stuff here.
All right, man, let's jump in.
So I guess it's best to start at the beginning of your career and talk about what kind of brought you into the music industry and why you stayed focused on event production and festival production.
Well, really, my first steps into the industry were back in high school. That was when I started. I kind of always grew up going to different concerts and festivals. It was a big part of my life growing up. And then once I got into high school, started learning how to DJ. And at that point, around my senior year, me and a couple buddies started throwing our own shows for all the like 14 and 19-year olds in the area. We came from a small town in eastern Washington state. Not a whole lot to do for the kids out there. And so that was really awesome to just get that experience of what it's like to, go through the whole process of booking a venue, pulling together all the equipment, dealing with all the logistics. But at the end of the night, having a bunch of people together in one shared experience. And that was like the first kind of taste of, wow, we can do this. This is an accessible thing.
Yeah.
And then from there, it all that kind of sparked the interest. And from there, everything else kind of just built off of those early high school experiences.
Well, yeah, that's interesting that you guys started at a young age. And I'm sure you guys didn't have that much pressure or expectations on you. So that allowed you to kind of experiment with things and learn the ropes without, a lot of deadlines or without prospects of having a budget and things like that. It was just all about having fun, I'm sure.
Yeah, the only expectations really were those that we placed on ourselves. And that's, that can be a nice spot to be in.
Yeah, definitely. So going into college, I know you're playing music and kind of founded a community up in Seattle. Can you talk about what it was like to kind of be in college doing those house parties and how that kind of led you to doing some more work?
Totally. So something I didn't mention just a second ago was that I'd also always played in bands. I play the electric guitar, and that was an earlier interest before I got interested in DJing. And then when I got into college, started taking that a little bit more seriously and started playing around in the local house show scene in the university district in Seattle, kind of in the University of Washington area. And so that was just really cool to see that scene, super underground, super DIY, shoestring, bootstrap kind of deal. And it was just fun, you know?
Yeah.
And so my junior year of college, I ended up moving into this house with some folks. And, before we signed the lease, I was like, hey guys, like I'm down to do this as long as you guys are okay with me putting together some sort of artistic gatherings at this place, because it was really the perfect spot. It was on a corner right next to the freeway, so sound really wasn't as much of an issue as it normally would be. The place had it was a double lot, so it had a full backyard with privacy, and then the interior was like 10-foot ceilings and hardwood floors, with multiple entrances. Like it was totally set up to do what the kind of stuff we wanted to do. And so just having that space, I mean, that's like a core like foundation of any event is the space.
Absolutely.
And I mean, right now we're in virtual world, that space is like totally being redefined as to what that space can be. But anyways, having that space really created the foundation for a lot of really great stuff to happen. So it started out as like me just like creating a Facebook event called The Gathering of the Creatives, which was just like a bunch of creative type people that I knew that I just invited to come over and bring your toys and let's just hang and make art. And then from there, like a community just kind of started to evolve, and we kept having these gatherings. And then it just started to get more and more organized. There was a core group of people that were kind of always involved in planning the stuff. And so just one show at a time, that's kind of my motto. We started putting together experiences, and it was very, very DIY, very underground, very community based. And it was really impactful for all of us to see just the possibilities of a group of people coming together and leveraging our individual strengths to make something amazing happen.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. And I have a similar experience in college, moving into a house and kind of doing some house parties and some shows like that. So I totally know what you mean about kind of getting different people with different interests, with different abilities together to kind of all make something really special happen. At
Yeah, man.
what point did you really feel like it was, oh wow, this is like really something special? This is not just your average little house party.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just like before we move on, I just wanted to touch on that core subject that we just touched on, this idea of this group of people working together to create a shared experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, right there is like, that's like why we all do this, right? Because of that feeling that you get when you're part of something bigger than yourself. Anyways, that group that we put together, so that house
Yeah.
I was talking about, we called it the castle. It kind of had like a Victorian style, and it was up on like this hill thing. And then the group that we formed, we called Prism, PRISM. And the whole ideology behind Prism was the physics of a prism, but in reverse. So with a prism, if you shine a beam of pure light through the lens of a prism, it diffracts the light into the rainbow colors.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was kind of the opposite of that, all these different colors, all being channeled through the collective lens, which was this community. And on the other end of it would come out this, that the one beam of light, which was that shared experience that we were all creating. And I think that was just so powerful for all of us, because conceptually it's like, oh yeah, that's cool. But then every show that we did, and then we did some art installations at festivals and things, anything that we did with that group kind of under that unifying principle, we kept proving that concept to us time and time again.
Wow, that's really amazing and interesting and a good philosophy to have, especially from a music standpoint, right? Because just like a good song has so many of those different elements, to do a good event, you want to have all those great elements as well, and involving those people. I'm curious about what you learned with that environment. How do you find someone and know that they're creative and collaborate with them? What communication skills did you learn in those early periods of being like, let's not just goof around, maybe let's have some fun and actually work towards something? Do you know what I mean? Like how do
Yeah,
you
yeah.
really pull those things out of people and find the right people for that?
Right. Well, this went along with the stuff I was studying in school. So I studied business as well as communication studies. And I was like, on the business standpoint, that's like, all right, how do we create value, create and exchange value in the world? And then from the communication side, that's like, how do we work together as human beings? And how do we communicate with each other to like move forward and make sense of this world? Uh,
Exactly.
so as I was studying those things, then it was kind of like playing out in my life. And to answer your question, I was just obsessed with getting to know people, and don't take this in an exploitive way, but I was always interested in like what people had to offer, or what people's strengths were. Not
Okay,
because
yeah.
I wanted to like take advantage of them, but just because that's what made it all the magic happen. Every time I met somebody, I was very interested in who they were and what made them tick, and what was their unique color that shined through, because I
Okay.
was always looking for ways to plug people in and see how we could work together.
Yeah, I've had guests come on to this podcast and kind of talk about the benefits of being genuine and nice, is a good approach. So, other than being just like a nice, approachable person, what were some of your best methods of drawing those elements out of people? If you kind of approach them, how do you not seem maniacal while doing that?
Yeah. How do you not seem maniacal? Um, well, yeah, there's a fine line. I really think with any relationship, a great way to get to know somebody, or to, take like to forge a path towards a relationship with somebody, a question is like such a great way to open up that door, because I think there's something in all of us that wants to be heard. And so when somebody opens up that door, that's basically saying, hey, like, I want to hear your story, I think that people are generally pretty open to that until they, whatever, become like jaded, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful place to be in college, because everybody is young and also looking for experiences and to build relationships, so you don't have to really deal with that concern as much. But it's also kind of obvious when people are just like out for self gain, because it's just kind of, you can't really hide it when
Yeah, I
someone's
know what you mean.
asking you questions. I mean, you could compare it to like meeting somebody at a club or whatever, like meeting a girl or like somebody that you're romantically interested in. Like, you can kind of tell if somebody is genuinely interested in you or is just trying to like, take you back to their place or something.
Okay, yeah. So that's why it's important to approach people with a mindset of curiosity and of genuine interest, and
Yeah,
not just kind of being like, oh, who do you know? What do you do? Because I can maybe use you for this and that. But instead of kind of approaching it in a more of a humane way and really trying to get to know the people behind them.
definitely, man. And then, like, I was also pretty naive back then and like over trusting. So, I mean, I definitely got into some spots where I'd be friends with somebody immediately, and then there were a couple times when I did have to like learn my lessons about, building real trust with folks before you but bestow too much of your trust in them. So there's that as well.
It's like a two-way street, like you got to trust other people, but you have to learn who will trust you as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool, interesting. So it sounds like your college and high school experiences, you started early, you really understood the value of networking and those interpersonal communication skills. So now that Prism is starting and you're in your later years of college, where does your career path take you then?
Yeah, so I mean, from a very young age, I wanted to play in a rock and roll band. and, tour the world. And, then in high school got into the DJ thing, and that kind of took my focus for a while. And we started throwing the shows in high school. And honestly, the whole time my head was like oriented towards the top, like whether it was music or, whether it was guitar or DJing or event production, I was always dreaming big and imagining that like pinnacle, like festival at the Gorge or world tour scenario. So when we were doing stuff with Prism, like definitely had big dreams of, developing that into some sort of, global traveling extravaganza with a massive impact, like to the scale of like Disney or something.
Yeah, you're real ambitious.
Always, yeah. And then right around that same time that Prism was getting going, I submitted an application to volunteer at a music festival that is no longer a thing. It was called Paradiso.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Happened every year at the Gorge Amphitheater here in Washington. So one year, I think it was that junior year of college, I applied to volunteer there, and I ended up getting picked up to join a new team that was being created that year, called Guest Services, which was essentially just like customer facing, problem solving. You're familiar with that. I think you did some of that work with Insomniac, or you were just about to.
Yeah, I did do a lot of work with kind of that customer experience in Insomniac. We call them headliner experience, but a lot of like those interactions with the fans, right? You're dealing with kind of the lost and found stuff, I'm sure, the info booth, that kind of realm, right?
Yeah, a lot of ticketing issues and like ID stuff, or like I lost my friend.
Yeah.
The ticketing stuff was always fun. That was pretty cool because like that was a paid position, so I was really really blessed to get picked up for that. And within a couple months, I started managing that team. So that was kind of like my first professional event production gig. And that was really rad because those festivals, I mean, I got picked up for Paradiso, but the company that produced that show did a handful of other, you could call them massives, in the Seattle area throughout the year. So we started working all of those shows as well. And that was really rad because I was definitely like on the front lines with the fans, but also had a look into the behind the scenes production, and had access to places, which is just cool to see like what's going on behind the scenes. Like this podcast is called Behind the Pulse. So that was rad to get that behind the scenes look. But honestly, the most value that I got out of that experience was interacting directly with the fans and hearing their feedback just in rapid fire, and just like uh just like solving problems left and right like it was nobody's business.
Yeah.
Because it just really, I mean, that's when you get to that scale, there becomes this divide between the producer or the promoter and the fans. And there really is no one. It's like if you're a fan and you need help, or you're lost or something, very often it's like, is there anybody in this freaking venue that knows what the hell is going on around here? And you like walk up to somebody in a yellow shirt and they don't know shit.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So that was a really cool opportunity because the guest services team really served as the glue or the intermediary, the like channel of communication between the festival promoters and the fans. And we got real-time feedback on how the guest experience was going, which I think is just, it was invaluable experience.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting that you went from just like college house parties to then getting a paid gig at one of the Pacific Northwest biggest festival. and then kind of doing it in a new innovative team within that festival. What were some of the immediate things that like jumped out to you that you could tell were like, oh wow, like these are some things that they were doing really well that maybe on the level that you and your friends were doing these parties that you know you didn't even think of? Is there anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah. I guess just like the creation of that team at all, it was like, oh my God, like what, like all these people would just be screwed if we were not here. So that was like, it just showed the importance of having that infrastructure of support for the guests.
I'm more so curious about how your mindset changed from like getting this first gig, because I'm sure this was one of your first festivals you worked, and then you were like managing this team, right? So didn't you, like you said, you saw a lot behind the scenes. So like
True.
what was it that you saw behind the scenes that really like kind of maybe blew your mind in some ways or amazed you and helped you learn like successful business practices for festivals?
Well, at that time, like I said, I was always very ambitious. I always ended up in roles that I kind of had to grow into. And in my head, I knew that I would be one day like running my own festival. But the truth is, I didn't really know what I didn't know the detail of what goes into it. So I remember having conversations with my lead in the beginning, and he really wanted to help me he wanted to help give me a leg up in the industry and give me other opportunities within the company. And he asked me questions like, I'd love to plug you in with people, but like I want you to tell me what you're more interested in. Like, are you interested in merch, or are you interested in like artist relations or production side stuff? And so like these terms were kind of, I didn't really know what he meant by production, you know. He-
Yeah.
because I'm like, isn't it all production? And like, no, the production is really like the infrastructure and the staging and the like the technical aspects of like bringing the show to life. So it was kind of like a crash course in like how to large scale event, because I was kind of for the first time seeing how all those roles fit together, as opposed to just having like a crew of college kids in a house, like all hands on deck, like figuring out how to get some lights and sound set up.
That's funny because like I totally relate with that, and it's actually the main inspiration behind me creating this podcast was like finding all those different roles and all those positions people had, because I went through the same thing of trying to get into these festivals, into these events and working, and then having people ask me that same question is like, okay, like what area do you want to work in? And I came from a similar mindset of being like, well, I thought everyone just did everything. I just thought it was like you just kind of help where you can. But no, in reality of these massive festivals, there are pecking orders and different groups doing their own thing that work independently from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I also learned a lot about, I guess, like behind the scenes strategy of like business models with festivals, like just the idea of the core concept that how important VIP ticket sales are for the budget of a festival.
Absolutely.
Like the whole like VIP experience aspect of it was really eye opening of like usually the fans that are paying for these VIP experiences, it's not like a direct correlation between what they're paying and the value they're getting out of it. But then what we would deal with at the show is like the things that they were promised sometimes hadn't been totally figured out yet. And
Okay.
these VIP ticket holders are really freaking important because that's like what's paying the bills around here. And so if you promise these people like an elevated experience, then you really have to deliver on that, or else they're not going to buy VIP tickets in the future, and that's going to hurt your ability to throw the festival.
Okay. So if I'm going to throw my own festival, I have to upsell every single person on VIP, and then it'll be successful. Okay.
And then deliver on your promises.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I kind of want to get into some of the other jobs you were doing at that point, right? Some of the stagehand jobs you were kind of mentioned. What was it like, kind of then getting in with USC events and like working from the bottom and like grinding at that level for all those shows? What did you kind of learn in that time?
Well, learned a lot about managing a team. I learned, it was like I said, it was a crash course in the just the event production world and the different roles like we kind of went over. Um, and I think it's worth noting that around that time in my junior year, I actually picked up an internship that was totally unrelated to events. But it does tie in later. I was working, it was a marketing internship for a tech company based in Portland. And that was like that was a whole other set of experiences where I got firsthand experience working in like a modern startup environment with professional, like tech minded people, like designers and software engineers, and really learned a lot of just like core principles of marketing and business and modern technology companies. So that like just is worth mentioning because it was around that time in my career that like I learned so much in that internship about just like how modern companies work, and different like sales models. And so that ended up ultimately benefiting me in the long run, and it applies to like my current role now.
Okay. Yeah, that's great because I'm sure it gave you that like kind of business mind within the music industry, right? I'm sure you know a lot of musicians as well as I do that don't think in that business sense. So that I'm sure helped you kind of realize like, okay, here's how we can make money while doing these events or while being in a band.
Absolutely, man. And it just goes it like I just mentioning it because we could talk forever about all the stuff that I've done in my life, but um with anything, man, just like they say when you're applying to college or whatever, like a well-rounded resume, right? Like the
Yeah.
diverse experience that you can expose yourself to can really help give you a leg up in other places that you might not imagine.
Mm,
But
totally.
but I think your question was like basically did you ask the question like how did those experiences working with USC kind of evolve to other opportunities?
Yeah, like I'm hinted at like the stagehand work. It kind of what you just said in that last point, but like how those like smaller jobs rounded out your kind of experience and you kind of know all the ins and outs of events and stuff because you work those like long hours.
Well, the long hours, that just comes with events, period. Being in college at the time, I wasn't really like aggressively pursuing a career in the event industry because I was doing school. And like I mentioned, that internship that I had, there was a new festival that was being organized by Paul Allen called Upstream Music Festival.
Okay.
It's sort of like made in the image of South by Southwest with like 30 something venues and a bunch of like industry speaker events and live performances and like all sorts of different programming. It was a pretty massive undertaking. And the producers that they hired to run that show reached out to one of my higher ups from USC, and they just needed a team of reliable runners to help move people and things around the festival. And so I was asked to join this team of runners at Upstream. And it was me and three other USC kids. basically just like driving a gator around downtown Seattle for a week.
Nice.
So that was like really freaking fun, first of all. Um, but that was like my first actual production gig. Like I mentioned before, like there's all the different cogs that drive an event, and production is kind of like a specific piece of that. And so that gig for Upstream was one of my first like legit production gigs.
Okay.
um, One of the dudes that I was on that team with, his name was James, and he was in a different spot in his career than I was. He was like trying to make shit happen. And so I was just kind of along for the ride in that gig, but he took that opportunity to really kind of tap in a little bit and do some networking. So he met a lot of folks through that opportunity. And then he started picking up gigs in Seattle, just like different production gigs for different companies through those connections that he made at the Upstream show. And I would run into him at USC shows. Like I'd be on a break and I'd be backstage or something, and I'd run into him and he'd be like, "Hey man, like when are you going to come and work some production gigs? They need good people." And I was just like, "Man, I'm still finishing school. Like I'm not ready for that yet." Um, and then when I graduated, that's when I called up James and was like, "All right, let's do some shit." And so at that point, he plugged me in with a few people that he had been working with. And that was sort of the start, I guess, of my production career at that point, when I started calling those folks and picking up the labor and stagehand stuff. And
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So it always helps to have a homie to kind of tap on when you're ready to get those jobs and kind of get in those positions. You kind of had a friend there already.
it sure helped, man. And then when you get in those spots where when you're like my head wasn't there when we were when we were doing the Upstream thing, but his was. And like we started that conversation, you and I started that conversation in the beginning of this about like meeting people and coming off the right way and forging like meaningful relationships. It can be hard, like especially if you have social anxiety. Like the networking thing is easier for some than others. And so and like I mean it's hard for me, honestly. Like once I meet you, it's like we're best friends, but it's kind of hard to like forge that initial connection.
Yeah, so it's good you found kind of like what methods work for you. Obviously some luck was involved there, but at the same time, you did at least know yourself well enough to kind of have those a couple connections, and then that led you to like a whole bunch more.
True, true. Whenever you're in that spot where you're in the world that you want to be in, that's your time to shine, baby. Like one way or the other, just get to know some people. Like don't be thinking about like, oh, can I like get something out of this? Just like forge relationships with people and come from a place of like true curiosity. And I feel like everything else just kind of opens up from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. It's interesting that you born and raised Pacific Northwest, and then you were kind of establishing yourself in Seattle, and then you started getting all these jobs and really becoming a part of the market there. I'm curious about your perspective on the stereotypical approach of wanting to be in the music industry is like make it happen and then immediately move to LA or New York or Nashville or Austin now. So I'm curious about your perspective on wanting to stay in Seattle and what you think that is like to not want to, just go down to LA, but more so establish more music in a other bigger city that is Seattle that you're in.
Yeah, that's a good question. That is like the $1 million question, right? And there isn't like a straight answer to it, but like opportunities just presented themselves for me in Seattle. And I know a lot of folks that have moved on to places like LA, just kind of hit a ceiling where they weren't really able to make anything happen, or they just didn't have enough work. And that's totally fair. So it's kind of hard to say, man. I honestly feel like my honest opinion is that California is sort of already done its thing. And I've actually been kind of interested in places like Portland lately. Man, I'm sorry, I don't really have a direct
No,
answer.
it's all right. I don't want to dissuade you of your current path. That's why I was curious about your perspective.
Maybe I should move to LA. Just
Okay, yeah, but I mean, you got your contacts and you made some things happen, and that kind of, from what I'm hearing, is why you decided to stay there, because you did have some things happen for you.
right. You just kind of go where the work is.
Well, maybe we can get into a little bit of those dope things that are happening for you now in Seattle. I guess we could talk a little bit about EXP and really what your current work is about, how you kind of landed that job, and what it entails.
So, like I said, after I graduated, I hit up my guy James and he plugged me in with some folks. And then it was kind of like a 6-month period of pushing road cases and like setting up audio equipment for like random corporate and private events around Seattle for different companies. And I just did that a bunch and like talk about just learning, man. Like it was kind of humbling to be doing that work because I felt like I was so much more. But the truth is that like I just got to be a fly on the wall for all sorts of large scale productions. And that was when I like first really, for the first time, was exposed to the world of corporate event production because I had come from concert festival world. And that's when I discovered that there's a shit ton of work in the corporate realm because these companies are always hosting events of all kinds, whether it's a trade show or like an all hands company gathering or a holiday party or whatever. They are doing a lot. So I did that for like 6 months and just did the networking thing while I was out there where I could and where it felt comfortable. And one of the gigs that I picked up was for this company called Benchmark Productions. And the owner's name was Austin Beaver. And I did a couple gigs for him. Same kind of deal, pushing cases, setting up audio equipment, moving furniture around. And one day I just ended up on the phone with him. He needed some help for a gig, and I just kind of dropped a nugget in his ear that if he ever needed help on the admin or management side, that I did have some experience there, and I'd love to get involved in that way. Then he asked me a little bit more. He's like, "Oh yeah, like tell me a little bit more about that. Give me the verbal resume." And to be honest, I fucking botched the verbal resume. I was like, I did like a festival at school at UW, and I got a business degree, and I can like make spreadsheets. It was bad. And then we got off the phone, and then I just followed up immediately with a text message that said, "Hey, I need to work on the verbal resume. I have a handful of experience in concert and festival production. I've produced a few events of my own, and I just graduated from the UW Business School." Yeah, I don't know. Like I put together like a nice text that was like, "Yo, here's my value."
Okay.
He said, "Cool. I'm gonna give you a call on Monday." And then we talked on Monday, and he basically offered me a job right then and there.
Nice.
And at that time, he needed help building processes for doing the work that he was doing. He was producing anywhere between 2 and 8 shows every month. And he didn't have a lot of organizational tools. And so he needed somebody to come in and just kind of help him sort out the madness, and kind of in like a project manager sort of role. And so I started doing that for him, and I've been working with him ever since. That was in the beginning of 2018. So we've been working together for almost 2 years now.
Okay, yeah, that's great. You got yourself in the right position. You probably didn't botch that verbal resume as hard as you really think you did, because then he offered you the job. And then that allowed you to kind of see behind the scenes of how this major independent company is doing all these events. In
Right.
that time, did you learn like the major keys, at least logistically, of how to throw these events? Like, what were some of the main factors that you realized like right away were like super important for the event to be successful?
Yeah, man. So basically there's the idea is that there are like just the core building blocks of an event, and then the I call them core documents that kind of run all of that. And I haven't like refined this framework in my head, but um to talk about the core documents, like a production schedule versus a master timeline versus a run of show. So like those are three schedules that they're all related to each other, but they serve a different function. And if you have those three documents, like basically any show can be built off of those three documents. So you've got the master timeline, which is like literally everything that is happening for this production, from the first truck that pulls into the venue till the last truck that pulls out of the venue after loadout. Kind of from a high level. You don't get the deep detail, but you have a line by line rundown of everything that's happening in load in, everything like the core timestamps throughout the event itself, and then how loadout is going to go. And that is
Okay.
where all the different vendors are listed. So you've got like catering and decor and production and talent, and let's see, catering, decor, production, talent. Am I missing anything?
Merch.
Merch, that's key. In corporate and private, there isn't a whole lot of merch, but sometimes there is. And it's usually more like swag. So there isn't like a point of sale. It's just like giveaways.
Like a gift basket.
Right. So yeah, like those core elements are all listed on that master timeline. And this idea of relationship between the producer and the vendors, which are like, when you first go to a festival, you just assume like, oh, it's just like one company that like does all this shit. But really what it is it's like a whole bunch of companies that are all working together to bring this thing to life.
Mm-hmm.
So the master timeline, that was like one of the first processes that I really dialed in for Austin, um, which was just such a great learning experience because it's every piece of the event on one document.
Yeah, like you got to learn all those different companies and all those different people, those teams coming together. Like you saw that from the big picture.
Right. And I was in charge of actually building those timelines and making sure that everything lined up right, and like asking the hard questions if something didn't line up right. So then you've got your production schedule, which you take that master timeline and trim off everything that's not production. So you take catering out, you take all your talent management out of it, you take your, depending on which vendors are doing what, you probably take decor off of it, and then you probably add some detail for like the specifics of the load in of production. So you've got your audio, video, lighting, and staging that's going to load in, the order in which those pieces are going to drop, and how all those pieces kind of come into play.
Okay.
On that production schedule, you might have like a note of when like an important thing with catering is going to happen, because you know that you need to have all your truss hung up in the air before catering comes in and drops all the tables on the floor. But you're not going to have like the dining schedule on that.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Like you'll know how many speakers you're gonna have on the stage, for X amount of time. But like you just said, you're not gonna know what is on the lunch menu on that same schedule.
Right. Right. You said how many speakers? Do you mean like people speaking?
No, I meant like PA speakers, for
Yeah,
example. Yeah.
for sure. Yep. And when they're going to get hung, and when sound check is. So then the third schedule is the run of show, also known as the show flow. And it starts from like the moment that doors open until the moment that the event is over. And that is a line by line rundown of everything that's going to happen in the show. And so that is like the holy grail for the production team in show, as you're running through your audio, video, lighting, and talent cues. So you have your stage manager that is tracking, he's managing people and things that are moving on and off of the stage.
Mm.
That run of show is just your holy grail for like when shit is going to happen. And a lot of times you'll have like notes for when you need to prepare something so that it's ready when it's time to go out. And in corporate or like nonprofit, like fundraising auctions and things, the run of show can get so detailed, like to the 3 minute, like
Mm.
minute by minute, this is going to happen, this PowerPoint slide goes up, this like special effects thing happens. And that level of detail is not going to be on the master timeline. The master timeline will have like, when do doors open, when does like the show start, when but then the run of show is like every tiny little thing that's happening on stage.
Okay.
So those are just like, I didn't really know where to start when you asked me like, what did you start to learn when you started working for Austin? But those are like 3 schedule documents that you would just think there's probably just one schedule, or you hear the word production schedule and you just assume like, oh, that's just like all the things. But no.
No, I think that was really interesting, and it is fascinating to hear kind of what goes into doing all those events and how you are able to organize and balance all those different teams and all those different people kind of with different roles. And it makes a lot more sense when you kind of go back to that point earlier of all those teams and then hearing different job titles and having someone say, oh, I'm a production manager, oh, I'm the stage manager. Understanding kind of those different timelines you just broke down really helps at least me understand how you get those jobs and why people are a stage manager versus a production manager, for example.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, the role that I got into with Benchmark that ended up becoming EXP, just accelerated my understanding of everything, because I was just thrown into it and was all of a sudden kind of at like an upper management position for some pretty robust shows. So I quickly picked up on kind of how all the cogs fit together.
Yeah, and you couldn't screw up. It was not castle house parties anymore, right? There's big money involved.
Yep. And then if you do screw up, you got to own it and learn from it. And it's going to suck, but like we'll move past it. And then the key is learning from it and not trying to like, the key is owning it and learning from it.
Okay. Yeah. I've always found I learn best from my mistakes, right? And that's always a big thing is like when I do mess up, I'm able to kind of reflect on that because it's more apparent, as opposed to if you succeed at something, you kind of say, oh, yeah, I just did it right. I don't have to think about it. But if you mess up, especially in the lens of event production, it's obvious where those mistakes were made. And so changing and tuning it is a little bit easier because you can see those things.
You're right, man. And I blew past people who would try to like play off things that they fucked up or try to blame somebody else or skirt the blame because like it would be obvious that it was their fault and they wouldn't own it and then they wouldn't learn from it because they were too busy pointing fingers.
That's great you had that perspective, and obviously you found success from it. I'm curious about the communication tactics that you've kind of learned to use in these environments because it is obviously very stressful to do these events, not only building up and organizing them, but also the day of. I'm sure there's a lot going on. I'm sure you've learned a lot about communication in that time. There any major points or tactics that you could really talk about and explain how you use them in preparing for these events and during the events?
Yeah, yeah. Part of why I was hired for onto Benchmark was because of my like extreme attention to detail. And part of that is very clear, deliberate communication, which that's like my first thing that I want to share is clear, deliberate communication because when you're in an event environment, there is so much going on and so many moving parts and a lot of times time is of the essence. And so you really need to fucking spit it out and like have it make sense.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's that. But then there's also the like the bullshitting and the like just finesse of like getting along with people and like the sense of humor aspect. And that's actually where I've definitely gotten better at the clear communication and all of that. It just, you naturally get better at it. But what I've really kind of developed, like needed to develop more and have like noticed that getting better and that helping me has been just the ability to kind of like just connect with people on a human level. So, and that involves kind of a lot of like pulling random stuff, like talking about a TV show that you both watched or coming up with a funny joke at the right time and like knowing when to laugh and like what kind of humor works in which situations. Like that stuff is actually kind of important in this environment because at the end of the day it is just like a bunch of people that want to have fun and hang out. So sometimes I struggle because I just want to like, first of all, I don't watch a lot of TV, and so like a lot of those cultural things that are like tokens of like ways to relate to each other just kind of fly over my head. So I sort of struggle with that sometimes and just like relating to people. But I have gotten better at it and it's been something that I've had to work on.
Yeah.
But it's a balance, because there's people that just bullshit all day long. And that also doesn't get you very far. So you kind of have to balance the clear, deliberate communication with the like just getting along with each other as humans and having people like you.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I appreciate you kind of talking about how you do have to work at it. It's why I always bring that because it is a skill and is something that you do have to learn how you communicate personally and to get better at it. It's really interesting that you bring up both ends of that spectrum. Is like you're a person who is direct and very deliberate, and you worked on being just straightforward with people because a lot of time in the event industry it is time sensitive or there's something that has to happen. You have to be good at not offending someone but telling them like, hey, you have to do this right now, hurry up. And then on the other end of the spectrum, being able to relate to those people, kind of what we talked about earlier, being personable, relating to those people in a way where it's like, okay, I can feel better about doing this. I'm sure when you are a part of a team and you feel like your manager, they're effective at communicating, but they're also effective at relating to you or about kind of being relaxed as well.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I know, like, you can get very far bullshitting your way through life, and but then there comes a time where you have to like put your money where your mouth is. And so there's definitely some value in being able to bullshit your way through something. And then comes the judgment day when you got to like make it happen.
That kind of like, okay, can you get serious now and like let's see what you do when you're like really trying hard, right? That mentality of like, okay, this is not a joke, like let's make this happen.
Right. And sometimes like that's one of my strengths that I bring to the table in these environments is my clear deliberate communication. So like when somebody says something that like, they're just kind of like not really saying anything, everybody around the table is like nodding like oh yeah, it sounds like they know what they're talking about, like being able to step out and be like, well actually though, like how are we doing this and how do these two pieces fit together. That can be a good skill to have, because like there's times when I've walked out of like a production meeting where people have just been like saying kind of nothing, and then you walk out of that and you're like, so what are we doing?
Yeah, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Okay, yeah, that's really important, and I think you gave a great perspective on communication, and kind of thank you for sharing your own perspective there. I'm now kind of curious about maybe your opinion because you have attended events, you have worked events, you have played events. Is there anything that comes to mind when I bring up an amazing event? What makes a normal event into an amazing experience for people?
What a good question. I think there's like some basics when you think of an event. At least for me, there's lots of different types of events. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
but I'll kind of paint the picture of like a stereotypical event from my perspective would be like there's some sort of notification that goes out, whether it's a ticket or a promotion that says, hey, this thing is happening. And then people come to the event and they have to wait in line and go through some sort of entrance. They go into the event, and then there's oftentimes there's some sort of food and beverage option, like a window that you walk up to that you can get food and beverage. And then there's usually a show area where you've got your stage, which is where your program is going to be. And there's a sound system of some kind with some lighting and some people that go up on the stage and do some stuff, which is usually the reason you came to the event, was to like to see or and experience whatever is going to be on the stage. Oh, okay. And then the thing happens on stage, and then everybody kind of walks out the door and goes home. So that little scenario that I just painted, there's like a bunch of boxes that you can check with that. Like, all right, the email that goes out. All right, the front entrance of like where we're taking tickets. You got to have a fully stocked bar and a bartender. You got to have security to make sure people don't like break shit and hurt each other. You have to have a stage and a sound system and people to perform on the stage. Like these are all boxes that you can check. That's how you make an event. And then how do you take that to the next level and create a truly spectacular audience experience? For me, that's where you, as the producer, you think of, I'm saying producer singular, but like whatever the group of people that is like envisioning
Yeah.
this experience, you think of it truly is an experience. I mean, that alone, it's like, it's not just an event where there's like a venue and a stage and you watch some stuff on a stage. it is an experience, which means it's like everything that happens from the moment that the guest hears that the event is even a thing, going through the journey of learning about the event, deciding whether or not they're going to attend, um, all of the materials that they interact with leading up to it, and then showing up to the venue. Maybe there's parking or camping involved. And then, walking up to the venue and going through the lines and scanning their ticket. If you think of every single step of the audience journey and put yourself in that audience member's shoes and do everything within your capabilities to make that audience experience totally spectacular, that is the type of thinking that creates that amazing experience. Because now you're not just checking the boxes of like what you need to do to throw an event. You are engineering an end-to-end audience experience, and that is where you can really make some magic happen.
Yeah, wow, that's really fascinating because you went from just breaking down an event, which kind of you explained like basic human needs, right? Like you want someone to hear about the event, and then you want to have them go inside of some structure, or maybe it's outdoors, give them some food, give them some drink, entertain them a little bit, and then get them out on their way. But then going into the amazing experience, it is that attention to detail that I like that you emphasize, and that I relate to that because when I went to my first music festival, Symbiosis, I considered that an amazing experience because of all the little things that were focused on. I felt like there was little painted signs in a tree that said something inspirational, or if you wanted to find the bathroom, there were signs that pointed you to the bathroom, for example. So it is that really important attention to detail and seeing when you put on an event, seeing it through the eyes of someone that would be attending the event totally unprepared. And there's a lot of things that go into it, especially the marketing, right? If you can hype someone up on your event before they even show up, to have those expectations that it's going to be amazing, that's already one box checked off right there. And then having all those little things to keep them interested and keep them engaged the whole time, I totally agree with you. That's where the amazing experience happens.
Yeah, man. And you're totally right. It's like all those little details that you're just going the extra mile to set up this environment for somebody to go in and interact with that environment and make memories. I love that you mentioned Symbiosis because yeah, those guys are awesome.
Yeah, but that's they literally like made me that festival. I was like, okay, I want to do this shit for a living. Like that's
And you and I were talking about like we've both done guest experience work.
mm-hmm,
And
exactly.
that totally ties back into that because it's like how are that's why I loved that opportunity, because you really got to see that and interact with that guest experience in a really intimate level.
Mm-hmm. Getting to ask them like things like, okay, what did you guys like? What didn't you like? Were you able to find the bathrooms all right? Was there anything confusing about the layout of the event? That's really useful.
Absolutely. And man, when you go to a show and like there are no bathroom lines and your ticket works and you
There's a smile on the ticketer's face when they scan your ticket.
right, and they give you a high five and like everything is awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
You got to go to the bathroom and you like look to your left and there's some R and you don't have to wait in line for it, and and you meet some random friend and like you're just walking around and you discover this shade structure and it's like a blistering hot day and there's a shade structure with like misters and like some sort of like chill entertainment, just like blowing your mind. Your wildest dreams like are coming true. Whereas like somebody who just checked the boxes probably wouldn't have thought to put in that shade structure.
So I know EXP is doing a lot of work doing virtual events. Can you break down a little bit about what that entails and some of the work that goes into throwing some of these virtual gatherings?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I gotta say, this past year, working with EXP, it's been quite the wild ride, just innovating and adapting to the environment that we're in. Honestly, man, like the first thing I'll say is that a virtual event, it still is an event. And the way that I like to describe an event is that it's a gathering of people in time and space. So with virtual, it's yeah, you put together a virtual event, it's still a gathering of people in time and space. However, it's not physical space that we're gathering in, it's now this virtual digital cyberspace. I just like to start there because you say virtual events and people are kind of like, oh man, what does that even mean? Well, you're still gathering people together in time. It's still an event. The venue just looks a little bit different. So with that, you've got like a spectrum, right, of how complicated that can be. So just like an event, you on one side of the spectrum, you've got, if we're talking virtual, you've got like a video call, like your classic Zoom call or Google Hangouts or whatever. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got like a virtual version of a full-on music festival or a conference or trade show. And on that side of things, that's where things get kind of complicated. But ultimately, you're still gathering people together in time and space. But with virtual, it's just totally changed. So it's still a gathering of people in time and space. But like I said, the space just looks a little bit different. And in this past year of putting together these virtual experiences, it really has expanded the scope of how we think about gathering people together, because we're now no longer bound to like having to be together in the physical space to have a shared experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you kind of laid out the landscape really well because you're right. It is a changing time where I think maybe a year ago people were looking at virtual events, looking at virtual festivals as something that was really weird, really odd. But now that we're seeing it's kind of customary. People are like used to it. And I think it might stick like this for a long time. We can talk about the implications of the future going forward, but for now, could you break down a little bit of the tools and the logistics that EXP uses to host some of these bigger and more intensive virtual events?
Absolutely. So, yeah, on the more complex side of the virtual spectrum, what you have at its core is something that looks more like a television broadcast than your typical live event. So, it looks a lot like a television broadcast, just with beefed up, enhanced technologies and methodologies for the audience participation and engagement, and the ability to include people in the broadcast that aren't necessarily there in studio.
Yeah.
So like a good example is this awards show that we did for a global marketing company that we work with. And so for that, we set up a studio, like a broadcast studio at their headquarters here in Washington State. So we brought a full camera crew. We had a team of Zoom technicians, and then the video crew. We had an audio team. And the layout of this event was that the executives were the hosts of the award show. So they were live in studio on camera, all dressed up. And then some of the nominees for the awards, if they were local, they came into the studio. And so as they were called, they would come up on stage on the live camera. But the majority of the nominees, like I mentioned, it's a global company. So they've got employees all over the world. And so those nominees all called in via Zoom. So there was a screen on camera behind the hosts that would display various content throughout the show. But during the awards portion, it would show the Zoom room of that award category put up on the screen. And then this whole show was live streamed through the Vimeo live platform. And then that video was embedded on a custom branded website that we put together for them that was password protected and all of that. All of the company employees, they received an invitation to the virtual award show. They were instructed to go to the link at, a certain time at a certain day. And then they get to this custom branded website with the live stream embedded on that page. And then there was also a chat embedded as well. So all the employees tuning in from all over the world could chat with each other as they were watching this live presentation hosted by the executives live in studio, calling in the award nominees from all over the world via Zoom.
Wow, that's really interesting that you kind of are using all of these technologies, whether they be physical or digital. Like you said, it's kind of like old school TV broadcast where you have cameras, where you have soundboards, where you have lighting. But now we're involving all of these like modern technologies. It's like web building, embedding abilities for the people in what would be the virtual crowd to communicate with each other in the form of a chat. I think that is really interesting to really dive into how we kind of expanding on these old methods and using these new technologies. So it sounds like EXP is doing some like really groundbreaking work in that regard.
It's pretty fun, man. I mean, each opportunity, when we go into discovery phase with the client and we're asking them what kind of experience they're trying to create, there's so many factors that we have to balance. Like we have to start with COVID, health and safety is the first priority. So we have our just like honest concern for health and safety. And then we also have the government regulations that we have to abide by. And then we have a whole set of technologies that are available to us. But really the methodology behind it and how you engineer this experience that's the fun part, because it's like pure innovation right now, because this stuff really hasn't been done before, at least at this scale.
Yes. Yeah, it is really interesting. And I'm sure we could hypothesize over what it's going to look like, but no one really knows. But being a professional in your field, I feel like your opinion is very valid. I agree that not going to see people lose interest in going to in-person events, in-person festivals, in-person concerts, but I don't think we're necessarily going to lose all these things that we've become accustomed to. I don't think virtual events are totally going to go away. So in your opinion, what do you think are the implication of these technologies that you're developing and that many others are developing going forward and moving on with?
Yeah, man. So right now, the hot buzzword in the industry is hybrid events, which is basically just this merging of virtual and live in person. And so hybrid, I think, is part of the um the road to getting back to a fully opened up society. So like as the restrictions lighten up, it's happening now. Like we're beginning to be able to come back together. But it's in limited capacity. So in this transition period, we've got the ability to gather a smaller number of people together. And so the hybrid piece will be bringing in who we can, but then creating a virtual experience for those who can't join us in person. But then beyond the transition period, I think that all this new tech and methodology behind creating a virtual experience is going to live on in both the concert festival world as well as the corporate setting. Um, in the corporate setting, a lot of these events, like an all hands meeting, for, say, that global marketing company that I was talking about. They do an annual event each year in the beginning of the year where they bring in people from all over the world that work for them. But, budget and logistics don't permit them to truly bring everybody. And so with this virtual technology, I think a lot of companies are going to start implementing these pieces to make their content available to a wider audience that previously, budget and logistics wouldn't permit for that. But then in the concert and festival world, people all over the world want to go to EDC Vegas, or they want to go to Shambhala in Canada, or these high profile festivals, Coachella, Bonnaroo. But not everybody can afford to pay $500 for a ticket and another 500 for the flight, and then you know lodging and food and all that. It's expensive. So I really think that a lot of festivals will probably start creating a virtual offering at a highly discounted rate, because now that'll give fans across the globe an opportunity to tune in, and that creates an additional revenue stream for festivals and promoters in general.
Yeah, but I think it's really interesting that you talk about those two markets, especially within the festival industry. Is that like that market of people that absolutely want to be in person and they want to be front row and they want to take all that stuff in. But then there's that market of people that maybe can't go in person or don't want to go in person and would rather be at home. In those two markets, I think you can't let go of. Any company doesn't want to lose those. They want to be marketing their events to both of those people. And I think that's a really good point to
Yeah,
kind of have there, because you gotta pursue all those options you have.
yeah, and I think some companies will keep their live they'll keep their live experience exclusive, but I think other promoters, they're gonna introduce a virtual component, and that's gonna open up their show to a much wider audience and potentially revenue stream for those guys.
Absolutely. Well, I think that wraps up all of our time. Sky, thank you for coming on to the podcast. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom. I will put all the links to find you and your projects, like your podcast, down in the description of this video so everyone can find you.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, quick plug. We were just talking about hybrid events, and EXP just posted our debut podcast episode on that topic. So if you want to hear me and Austin from EXP nerd out about hybrid events for 15 minutes, check that out.
Excellent. Excellent. I definitely have to check that out. Well, you take it easy, Sky, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, brother.
Big shout out to Sky for coming on to the podcast. Please go ahead and check him out and his podcast down below in the description of this video, as well as you'll be able to find ways to connect with me. I appreciate you all listening. Peace.